and welcome back to 27Crows Radio. I'm your host, Brie Fauché, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Katrina Redelsheimer. You may remember Katrina from the horrifying footage taken in February 2017 at the UC Berkeley riots, where she tried attending a Milo Yiannopoulos speech and was maced, then attacked by rioters and Antifa, along with her husband. She's here today to give more details on the lawsuit she has filed against UC Berkeley and how she came to this decision. Welcome, Katrina.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
No problem. I wanted to bring more awareness to what was going on with your lawsuit. Now, for those in my audience who might be unaware, can you give me a brief overview as far as what happened to you and your husband that night in February 2017 when you went to see Milo speak?
Absolutely, yeah. So we came together with a group of friends, and some of those are on the lawsuit, and some of those decided not to join it. And we walked over to see the speech a little bit before the time the doors were supposed to open. We thought they were going to open at 7 p.m. Turned out the event had been canceled, but at least for my husband and I, we didn't know that. We had no way of getting any kind of announcement like that from where we were before on the train and all that. So we walked over, and when we got over to the area where the doors were supposed to open at 7, it was a little bit before 7, and there were protesters everywhere. There was already some stuff on fire, but there were police standing around outside of the building, and we still didn't see any signs saying the event was canceled. We didn't hear any announcements saying, this isn't happening, go home, nothing like that. We heard after the fact that there were dispersal orders issued, but they must have either been not while we were there or not on the side of the building we were on, something like that. We never heard anything. So we, thinking apparently naively that the event was going to go on at 7, figured, well, we can just hold out here for, really it was like going to be 10 more minutes, something like that. And then we'll be let inside the building and we'll get away from whatever these people are who are around us, who, when we first got down there, it was crazy, but it wasn't, it wasn't what it looked like later. We didn't see as many people, we didn't see people with faces covered. We saw a lot of people with signs. We saw a lot of people who were clearly not happy. Yes, the things were on fire. There was people kind of dancing around some sort of bonfire thing that I don't know, I didn't go close to. But we didn't see, the classic, well, now it's classic, I guess, Antifa, covered face, carrying weapons sort of thing in a group or anything like that. Then about 5 minutes before we thought the doors were going to open, there was a very visible shift in the crowd. Suddenly we saw a ton of people definitely carrying weapons. We saw a ton of people all in black, people with their faces covered. And, again, it's like just a few minutes. We think the doors are going to open. They're really all around us because of the way where we were waiting, right? We were waited by this police barricade that they had set up, which to us looked like the closest thing to a line to get into to go to the event. And we were kind of surrounded on all sides by these people, so we didn't feel like there was a safe way to get out, and our best bet was just to wait for the doors to open. Unfortunately, a few minutes before we thought that was going to happen, these rioters formed up in their black bloc tactic, which is basically they all just stand side by side with their faces covered in a big mob and then
Real brave,
march.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So and they admit publicly too that they do this specifically so that no individual can be identified and prosecuted, right? And so they start their march. So they were inside the plaza we were standing in and marched out toward the street on the other side of us. So we were essentially didn't have much of a good option with our backs against the barricade. We couldn't go toward them, obviously. If we went away from them, there was still more of a crowd of these people, like more of a mob to our other side. So we just stood very, very quietly, very calmly against the fence, tried not to engage with anybody, and hope that they would walk past us. The first couple of rows walked past us without incident, but then in about the third or fourth row, first a woman came up and shined a bright light in one of my friend's faces. That was Kiara Robles, which is a tactic they use to disorient people so that they can attack them more easily. She pushed the light out of her face, at which point, while we were distracted looking at her, a gentleman came in. I shouldn't use that word, but anyway, a male came in with a flagpole and hit my husband and myself on the head. And then I pushed him back. And at that point, this really tiny person, we are not sure if it's male or female, but seemed female, all in black, like head to toe ninja look, who's even shorter than I am, came down the line, like kind of snuck in between and pepper sprayed every single person in our group in a row. And I was kind of the last one there on the end to get it. But I was looking out in the crowd looking for, another person to come in and attack us with the poles. And so I turned around and it was just spray right in the face. So not a lot of people have been pepper sprayed. There's a reason police use it for crowd control. It's incapacitating in a way that you really don't understand unless you experience it.
It's excruciatingly painful, yeah.
I would say it's the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I haven't given birth yet, so I'll update you.
Neither have I. We'll leave that to one day.
I'll update you after that. But, I'm no stranger to injury in sports and things like that. And pepper spray, like hands down the most painful thing that I ever experienced. So that happens and like you're done. I mean, you can't see, right? And humans are very visual creatures. I'm not Daredevil. I can't defend myself when I can't see. I couldn't open one of my eyes for another 4 hours. It was before I couldn't get the left eye got the most of it, but I got both, right, very close in the eye and very like full in the eye. It was 4 hours before I could open my left eye. And until you can wash it out, you're not opening either eye. Like it's not happening, right? So basically then they mobbed us. And thank goodness there's video because I wouldn't know exactly what happened. I mean, I turned around to face the barricade to at least protect my face. That was the best thing I could think of to do. But there was nowhere to run. They were on all sides of us. I was blind and the barricade was blocking me. I could tell people were hitting me on the back, on the head. Someone came up and sprayed some other chemical down my back. I never found out what that was, but it left a bunch of welts and burned for like several days. And I was trying to listen to hear where my friends were, and in particular where my husband was. Totally, there was kind of a weird thing where I felt like at first I kind of heard all of them, and then one by one they kind of disappeared as people were either being pulled off or were trying to escape themselves. And I got down to like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm one of the last few here against the fence. And luckily right then, some good Samaritans came from the other side of the barricade. And I think they were mostly journalists, like independent journalists, because the mainstream media journalists had all run away a long time ago. That was another one of the shifts that we noticed, the 5 minutes before. They were everywhere trying to film things. And then all of a sudden they were gone. So somehow they knew what was about to happen,
How coincidental, yeah.
Yeah, even though they didn't want to, cover that very much in the media. So anyway, these Good Samaritans, these independent journalist guys, I think, pulled us over the barricade. Well, I had to climb over 2 because of the way they oriented them. Climbing over the second one, I fell and I hit my head on the concrete. And at that point, if I didn't have a concussion before from being hit on the head, I definitely got one then. And then I was kind of just wandering around blind, asking people where my husband was because I couldn't do anything else. One of the green hat people actually came and helped me. I know she thought that I was a protester who had been hurt by police, didn't realize that I had been attacked by the protesters. Mm-hmm. But she helped me anyway. One of the red beanie Antifa medics helped me as well, probably under the same impression. But she guided me up to the stairs. We were trying to get inside so I could wash my eyes out. The police wouldn't let us in. So the medic came and helped us. While she was treating me for about a second, I got my eyes open and there were no less than 8 camera people, like journalists, just around me in a semicircle taking like presumably identical pictures of me on the ground. So one of those is in the lawsuit. That was printed in Berkeley side, which I understand the value that journalism has, but I always find it particularly sick that there are just all these people, especially redundant people, right? It's like, what are you possibly adding by being another person taking this photo, right? When there are people, suffering around you. In any event, so then I was finally, my the green hat woman who was helping me was like, well, we can't get you into this building. What do you want to do? It's like, well, I need somewhere to wash my eyes out. So can we find somewhere else? And we ended up having to go quite a ways into campus to find a building that was unlocked because the building had been on lockdown. And They had some other helper people there, luckily. So like I kind of asked this guy to like stay and stand guard because I was terrified of being left alone in a bathroom
Of
blind
course,
with like
with
all these
rioters and
around.
Antifa outside, yeah.
Exactly. And it takes about 30 minutes to wash pepper spray out of your eyes. So I was just washing over and over and over again until I could get one eye open enough to text and start to try and find out where everyone was. And eventually we regrouped. So there, I gave you a very detailed response,
No, I
but that
like it
was
because I know a lot of people
my
are like,
side
UC
of it.
Berkeley riot. Wait, wait, wait. Because UC Berkeley is kind of famous for having all kinds of protests, and
True.
they might not know, like, which one is that again? But yeah, how long did it take you and your husband to recover from these injuries?
Well, some of them are permanent. For him especially, like as far as any doctor has said, he's not ever going to fully get back some of the things.
Because he was kicked, right?
So we know he ended up unconscious. We know that. He was beamed pretty good with that first pole. And he knows about when his memory loss starts and then when he like starts remembering things again. And then we have a little bit of video footage, but it's not super clear. Unfortunately, it's kind of like high up in the crowd, so we can see him and see him being attacked, but he's on the ground for a lot of it. So yeah, we're not exactly sure. Is he being kicked? Is he being hit with objects? Like what's happening, here and there. The main thing we know is, the one of the people we were able to identify and name in the lawsuit is this UC Berkeley, or maybe former, I'm not sure, but at the time a UC Berkeley employee, Ian Miller, who bragged about, taking him down and punching him and stuff like that. You can see in the video there's a lot more than one person attacking him. And when the I don't know, less insane people decide to, try and stop it and pull him off. It's pretty interesting to watch that part of the video too, because I'd say it's about 50-50. Once some people decide like, hey, this is too far, we shouldn't be beating an unconscious man on the ground. There's still a good half of the people standing around there who are like gung ho to keep going, and that's how we get another one of the named defendants, Raham Mirabdal. We're not, again, the video is kind of unclear whether she actually touches him or not, but she goes up to him while he's on the ground and screams "fuck you" in his face.
Really brave.
Yeah, really brave and also illegal. I mean, people don't always understand how that aspect of the law works. They're like, oh, free speech, whatever. You can't be part of a mob and encouraging the actions of a mob that's doing violence. That's not protected speech. That's not, free association or anything like that. There are tons of cases, famous cases of like, for instance, gang rapes, right? Like if you're a guy who doesn't actually rape the victim, but you're filming it or you're cheering it on or you're just watching, even that's like aiding and abetting or something like that. You know what I mean? That's also a crime. So now the police weren't terribly interested in prosecuting that crime, but luckily we also have the civil court system.
Thank goodness for that. Now, when did you initially realize that the university and police department had violated your rights to such a degree to merit a lawsuit?
Well, we obviously knew right away that there were individual personal injury claims to be made. We figured there was probably some sort of premises liability pretty early on, within the first week. I think we were thinking about that because in general, an institution that's open to the public is required to have that space be safe. Right? Like if you walk into a store and you slip in some water, you can sue them. So one would think that if you were invited onto a campus with tickets for an event and then a riot occurs that, wasn't adequately prepared for, or wasn't, there were serious attempts to prevent it, that you would have, a similar sort of thing. We did, though, then go talk to some of the law firms around the area, and not really anyone was interested in taking the case. The big reason being, the typical problem you run into with civil litigation, which is you need an easy case or you need big dollar signs or both.
Yeah.
So technically, no lawyer we spoke to disagreed that we had a claim, that like that the liability was real, but it wasn't worth it for them to go after it. Which is why we're so lucky to have the lawyers we do have who are doing this for basically motivated by the fact that they want to push back against this left-wing violence and protect conservative speech and all of that.
Because your lawyer's working pro bono, right?
Our lawyer who's handling the constitutional claims, that's Bill Becker from FreedomX. He is working pro bono. FreedomX is a 501c nonprofit. And then the personal injury side is being handled by Sean Steele from Sean Steele Law. And he is doing it at a discount. And again, it's smaller dollar amounts than they would normally go after, or rather the amount of work that they have to put in for the dollar amount that they're likely to get, right? Because the other challenge with it, and we're lucky in this case, it looks like Ian Miller has a house. So he actually has something to go after. But even if a person, even if you have someone who attacks you on film and, no question, you would absolutely win in court. If you can't actually collect damages because the person doesn't have any money, a lawyer's not going to take the case because that's how the lawyer gets paid, is out of that money, right? So it's just I was aware of this stuff before, I'm not kind of ignorant of the challenges of the legal system, but being in the middle of it is pretty fascinating.
It's so incredible that you found a lawyer that wanted to take the case just for free speech reasons and not because of so many dollar signs, because I always think of like the typical Hollywood type of lawyer who just wants a case to get that money. So it's fabulous that you guys found a lawyer who wants to do it just because it's right, and that you were able to find actually damages where you could actually hopefully win the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when I think of UC Berkeley, I generally think of the other protests that have taken place there, dating back to like the 60s with like Vietnam and feminism and the various socialist protests that they've had there, and the far left-wing protests from decades. So, in theory, should the police have known how to handle a situation like this, especially with the history of Milo events? I think 2 weeks earlier someone was shot at a Milo event, so this is something the police should have known how to handle, right?
Right, exactly. There certainly was no reason for police to be surprised by the scale of the event, which was one of the things I think the university and police were trying to claim afterward. Of course, we were just planning on attending the event, so we weren't doing a bunch of security research. Sorry about that. But we did, after the fact, go and look, kind of what had been up there. And these events are organized by Facebook. And Antifa and their related groups, it's usually not under an Antifa banner exactly, right? They're always like related groups that are cooperating with them. They plan all this stuff out in the open. You can see in advance the number of people expected to attend. You can see the kind of rhetoric that's being used. You can see how many people were advocating for the event to be shut down. And you don't have to read between the lines too much to tell what that would mean. So the possibility of something happening would have been very obvious to anyone doing sort of basic preparation for the event. And everything that the police and the university represented is that they were doing more than their usual amount of preparation. They had meetings with the Berkeley College Republicans over and over, meetings with Milo security, all this stuff, getting ready for it. So they can't exactly argue that they were blindsided. And then on top of that, exactly what you mentioned is also what we're arguing in our complaint, which is they're not strangers to this. Berkeley as a city, both as a city and as a university campus, they kind of know how to deal with this. And to be honest, we saw that after the fact, right? Because after this incident, there were a couple of rallies held in Berkeley. And the first one, the police again dropped the ball, in my opinion, and a bunch of violence ensued. But at later ones, the police did basic things like enforcing the no masks law, right? That's pretty much a law everywhere. You can't cover your face for the purpose of obscuring your identity so that you can commit a crime. And in a lot of cities, you can't cover your face at all. Like, even if it's just cold, you want to wear a ski mask, you can't do that, right? Just enforcing that law prevents so much of this violence, right? Or when people come in, one of the things they like to do, which we saw at the rally, is like carry a flag pole, but it's really a big wooden beam, and they'll staple a sign to it. So it's technically a protest sign, but then you'll look and like the bottom of the wooden pole will be sharpened to a point. And or it's metal or different things like that, right? So those are kind of the ways that they like disguise weapons, and bring that in. So at later rallies in Berkeley, they're like, you can bring signs in, but they can't be on a pole. Okay, you have to hold up hold up the sign with your hand or something like that. Perfectly reasonable. They'd come in, they don't have weapons, and they don't start shit, basically, right? So it's quite well known how to effectively deal with these types of situations, but for whatever reason, they opted to pursue a strategy that, in my opinion, and this is our argument, wasn't just of non-interference, but doing things that actively made the situation worse that they had to have known would make the situation worse.
That's just fascinating to me that they actively made it worse when their job is to protect and serve the people. From what you could observe, how are police kind of lacking in their security that night? Because from what I understand, they had you very confined.
Right. Prowl Plaza is a fairly wide space, but when it's filled with a couple of thousand rioters, it's quite small. And then the barricades were set up, a good ways in front of the steps leading up to the student center where the event was supposed to take place. So that kind of confined things further. And then on the side toward the interior of campus, theoretically there's egress through there, but that's where you saw kind of that thing that was on fire, where they had pulled the lights down and where like a big mob of people were sort of blocking there. And then out on Bancroft, actually, they had also managed to light something on fire and the streets were blocked by police and they had to like redirect traffic and stuff like that. So at the very least, kind of on, really on all sides, I would say there was not like a kind of a path to get out there. And then beyond that, police, when we first got there, were visible, they were present, but it was very surprising to me how few. Obviously, we were just in one area. They have other areas to cover. But the police have arrangements with neighboring departments to bring in more bodies when they need them, right? And I talked to, we went to the police station and gave statements after, and I spoke to officers there who were not from UC Berkeley. They had been called in from other campuses. And I was asking them like, oh, were you there that night? And they were like, no, actually. And I was like, that's weird. Like, why'd they call you in after the fact, but not before when they knew this was going to be a big thing? And they were like, that's a good question. I'm not sure why anyone was off that night. And we saw maybe 4 officers or something like that outside of the building. We could tell there were more inside of the building. And then even those 4 who were outside disappeared, right before the violence actually started. And no one was there, kind of monitoring it or helping us. And this is the problem, right? It's like, they know that if they, from past experience, that they have documented in their own policies, if they issue an order to disperse, right, saying this is an unlawful assembly, y'all gotta leave, and that's all they do, that it makes things worse. That it makes things worse in Berkeley because the people who are protesting just get angry, then more people show up to see what's going on, and you're not you're actively making the situation worse by doing that. So what they need to do is either issue a dispersal order, either not issue such a dispersal order, or if they issue it, they need to actually take action to enforce it. Mm-hmm. Go out and arrest some people, in other words. But they made, and they've, said this like openly, they made a strategic decision not to arrest anyone that night. And their justification was because they didn't have enough officers. And every time you arrest someone, it takes 2 officers. So there'd be 2 officers not there to do the other stuff, right? But previously, when they spoke to the Berkeley College Republicans, they were promising them, 100 plus officers. They were promising them, lots of police presence, that they were going to bring in people from other departments. And at the end of the day, they decided not to do that. And I think the final number ended up being something like 60 that they were claiming were there. Berkeley police, of course, not happy about this because while only a lot of the news articles are citing $100,000 of damage like done by the riot, it was $100,000 of damage done to campus. $500,000 of damage was done to Berkeley.
Goodness, I hadn't
to
heard
the
that
businesses
before.
out there, right? No, that's one of the things they do to kind of try and minimize it, right? We went down. I mean, even weeks and weeks later, there are still boarded up windows. on the main street down in Berkeley. They wreaked havoc in Berkeley. So the Berkeley police obviously didn't appreciate that, right? But from the university police and their perspective and the university's perspective, they made the right call on a cost benefit analysis, unless our lawsuit does well.
Because that's what matters is the cost benefit, right?
Correct. It cost them $100,000 in property damage, which is less than it would have cost them to bring in adequate police support from other departments that they would have had to pay for, of course. So it works out for them. But then, too bad for Bank of America, too bad for all the small businesses, too bad for, the Berkeley police who had to deal with the vast majority of the fallout as the riot spread into the city and caused more damage there.
See, I hadn't even heard that the riot spread into the city. The news kind of made it sound like it was confined to UC Berkeley, so the tentacles of this just spread and spread and spread in ways the mainstream never told us. Did they ever manage to arrest some Antifa or thugs or rioters, anyone in the coming months ahead?
All I heard was one person was arrested that night. I don't believe they were arrested by UC police. I think they were arrested by Berkeley police, and I'm not sure what that was related to. As far as I'm aware, that is literally the only arrest. The two named defendants in our suit were not arrested, despite the evidence that we have.
Right, because they were bragging about it on social media, right?
Yeah. However, the guy got a lawyer, and as far as we've heard, that's the end of it. We don't know for sure. Part of the reason, people are asking, why do we take so long to file the lawsuit? It's almost been a year. Part of the reason for that is we put out sunshine law requests to the university and to the police, hoping that they would give us the information so we didn't have to put them through discovery. Because if they gave us information and we could find the individuals responsible for things, we're more than happy to go ahead after those individuals. But, we gave them almost a year to respond to our requests, and we've gotten nothing. All I have is the police report from the report that I gave, with a ton of stuff redacted, of course. And so if there has been action taken, for some reason they haven't told us, but I would be very surprised if that were the case from, everything else that I've heard. And these people we know are showing up at subsequent events and continuing to do violence. Right. Yvette or it happened before this too, right? Yvette Falarca was one of the people inciting the riot on February 1st. She was also recently, charged with attacking a guy in Sacramento. That was from the prior year. That was June 2016 or something like that, I think. Finally facing consequences for that. But in the meantime, she incited another riot in Berkeley that caused $600,000 of damage and, knocked two men unconscious and attacked all these other people. She's attended subsequent demonstrations in Berkeley doing the same thing that also turned violent, also facing charges from some of those because she attacked people there. This is the problem with, not having the speedy justice system that we're promised or we're supposed to believe that we have. You have literally years after a person does something blatantly illegal, blatantly violent on camera in front of police. And if they take 2 years for that person to face consequences, they can cause a lot of damage in between.
Yeah, I'm no stranger to that. Unfortunately, a few years ago, we had a young man who drove his car into our neighborhood and into a few houses, including mine. And as far as I know, 3 years later, he still hasn't stood trial for it. So yeah, the justice system is slow as a snail. I remember you previously saying, I think it was on Free Domain Radio, that the university faculty had a very poor handling of the students as well. They were inciting them to commit violence or egging them on, and then they had a celebration afterwards.
So that has kind of a couple different pieces to it. The faculty at the university, a huge number of them, I think it was over 100 by the end, or maybe it was right at 100, signed a letter saying that Milo's speech should not be allowed on campus, that it wasn't protected speech. Their justification for it not being protected speech was essentially that Milo's speeches are harassment. Illegal harassment or something like that.
Defending that in court.
Right. I can see in a few instances what they mean, but unfortunately, prior restraint is not how you get to operate, right? So if he did do something harassing during the events, they could have the university police arrest him and deal with it accordingly. But I don't think prior restraint would be reasonable in that case, which the administration of the university, decided. They were like, we don't like the guy. We wish you weren't coming, but free speech. We're going to go ahead. This is our obligation. As a public university, we have to do this. But at the same time, they, enabled essentially people who took the opposite view, which is that the moral thing to do is to shut this down by any means necessary, as the group's name goes. So the way that they supported that was in the student newspaper prior to the event. There were multiple articles written by students, one of whom was a first-year law student, one of whom was an undergrad, announcing the protest and doing it in such a way that it was very clear. They were saying that the purpose of the protest was to shut down the talk. So that's not a protest, that's a riot. Mm-hmm. That's not, a protest that's trying to shut down something else is not protected speech. And yet the university allowed this to be published, their resources used for that, did not discipline the students who were putting this out there. So that was before the event. And then one of those articles organizing the protest, that student is involved in a group that is not a student group, but it does meet on the Berkeley campus. It met on the Berkeley campus, both right before the event to plan the riot and after the event to decompress, aka celebrate the success of the riot. And then on top of that, there were student groups allied with that off-campus group who were also basically doing the same thing, right? So the university's line after the fact was these were outside agitators. These were people who had nothing to do with UC Berkeley. They just came in and caused trouble. It's not our fault. That is patently false, right? We've got an employee of the university, first of all, confessing to beating my husband unconscious on social media. So that doesn't look too good. But then secondarily, there's a massive paper trail of this stuff, right? Because this stuff is organized on social media. These were groups who were there. We have video. They were carrying signs when they were there. They had flyers and stuff promoting the event in advance. So we can look at that and see, okay, here's this flyer saying meet at this place to do this protest. And here are 4 university-funded student groups listed on this poster as participants in this. How can you claim that especially the day after the event, right, with no possibility that they actually engaged in an investigation? They already know that none of these people were students. None of these suspiciously student-looking people who attacked us, student size, student body shape, happen to be in the area, student age range.
Right age
most
group,
of them, yeah.
Dreadlocks.
Yeah, no, probably has nothing to do with the university. Obviously, why would it? So, and then after the fact, these students and more. Put more articles in the student newspaper, which again, university-funded publication, celebrating the riot, saying, yeah, we rioted, and one even said the university is full of shit, saying that students didn't riot because this was 100% a student riot, and we're proud of it, and we'll do it again. And that same student was advocating for another riot on a separate issue in June. It was for gay pride. Apparently, it should be a gay riot instead of a gay parade for gay pride, according to this person.
Because walking around with dildos in the street, it just isn't enough. You have to have a riot.
You got to smash windows with them, do something to really make your point. So these people, these are students. They are students, and we see, like I mentioned on Stefan. We see people getting kicked off of campus for making jokes, with in violations of codes of conduct, nebulous codes of conduct, and all of that kind of thing. But apparently, you can orchestrate, pull off, and then celebrate a riot in which people were almost killed, and tons of property damage occurs, and tons of crimes were committed. And that's fine. That's not a problem on any of these codes of conduct. That doesn't warrant even an investigation, let alone expulsion, according to UC Berkeley.
Well, I think you guys have an excellent chance. I mean, or at least an excellent case. I've heard that the chances are low of winning, but the case itself sounds really white pilling. And do you think that having a lawsuit like this will help others who have been violated by radical left-wing groups like Antifa or BAM to one day come forward and take legal action? Because I've heard so many people say, that the system's corrupted, it's owned by the left, we can't possibly have any kind of lawsuits to fight back, there's no point. But you kind of broach that field, so yeah, do you think, yeah. Go ahead.
I think it would help enormously if people did that, because win or lose the lawsuit, it means publicity, right? So one thing that's been remarkable to me, and I fully subscribe to like don't talk to the media, and I do not have much respect for the legacy media, much rather be on alternative media like your show, but we have pushed out more footage of the riot, and in particular of the people being injured, which was suppressed before, through filing this lawsuit, than ever came out after the actual incident took place. That's been really interesting. There's several local news stations in the Bay Area, put together these segments on what happened and interviews with my lawyer and with myself, and there's way more footage, way more than I ever saw, even on Fox News.
Were they just hiding it
Before?
They
always have plausible deniability, right? Because some of this stuff is taken by these independent journalists who then go put it on YouTube, many of whom are like fantastic people who are like actually trying to stop what they considered immoral stuff. The mainstream people can always say, well, that's not, we can't air that because it's not verified. And then, it takes time to verify it, and by the time it's verified, like the story's over. So that's one potential justification. But in other cases, they have their own footage and they just sit on it and they're not going to put it online and we'll never see it. We had, the big famous thing, I think, when, which is, I'm very glad it got out there, but it severely understates the degree of violence, was the interview that Kiara Robles gave with ABC7 that ended with her being pepper sprayed.
I remember that.
That actually happened before what I described, that the big attack on us. But first of all, that interview with ABC7 was very long, and all they aired was her last sentence and the pepper spray. Very grateful that they did. My big fear was that wasn't going to go out at all. Luckily, we were also filming. One of the people from our group was filming at the same time, which is just good practice. You don't want to let the only camera on you be
the best weapon you can have is a body cam, right?
Right, yeah, which unfortunately were banned in the Milo event, or I would have worn one. But before that, she gave an interview, I want to say with NBC, but I don't want to trash the wrong network, although, let's be real, they're all trash. But she gave a very long, it was actually like a debate. Like the reporter grabbed a protester who was this very weird guy with like a stovepipe
It's always
hat.
like a dweeby guy, yeah.
Weird, really weird dude. And then Kiara, and they had like a debate that she filmed. And as always, the reporter seemed very nice. If anything, she almost seemed on our side because that guy was so crazy that I was just kind of like, what is going on? But she spent a long time doing that, while we're kind of in the middle of this like volatile situation, and it never aired. It wasn't posted online, wasn't put anywhere.
Probably because she looked good and she had really good answers, right?
Most likely, yeah, right? Or because the story becomes something else. Like I said, there's always this plausible deniability type thing, but it does seem to be very convenient, right? That people think like, oh, I'll just prepare really well. I'll do really well with the media, and I won't fall for the gotcha questions, and I'll look good and all that. You can totally do that, and they can totally not air it. That's usually what will happen, unless you're such a big name that it's worth it to them to put it out there so that they get a ton of views, even if they look bad, right? I feel like that's what's happening right now with like the Jordan Peterson, Kathy Newman thing on Channel 4. But if you're just, random person on the street, a random representative of the right, which apparently is what I am now, you're way too vulnerable. You're way too vulnerable, right? Because you can beat them at every turn and they still have that ultimate trump card of not releasing the footage.
I've seen them as well really be manipulative, where they'll take you where they're like, okay, we're just doing a sound check and you're just sitting there, and they'll use that clip and then paste it in after they've asked you a question to make it look like you don't know the answer. They're really devious. So yeah, I always have a policy of never talk to the mainstream media. And they end up just going to your alternative media website like mine and just taking the worst thing they can find and putting it in there. So yeah, they're devious. Everyone stay away from them.
Yeah.
What advice do you think you would give to other right-wingers, or I don't know if you're libertarian or right-wing, but to other individuals who may have been violated by Antifa or who want to attend these kind of events in the future but are a little bit hesitant given what happened to you?
Well, I would say if you have been attacked in the past, don't stop talking about it. People are, the trail's sort of already been blazed. People are aware of this, right? I mean, there's still a lot of denial. There's still a lot of cover up by the mainstream media, but we don't need the mainstream. Reach out to people like Bree, reach out to people like Stefan Molyneux. There are reach out to Mike Cernovich. Like, there are tons and tons and tons of people who are interested in covering this stuff and interested in being part of this fight. There are legal resources if you have enough, to kind of go that path. But just the more stories we get out there, right? There was something so powerful, I thought, at I don't know at what point someone put it together. I think it was actually before even the Milo event happened, like just pictures of violence against Trump supporters in 2016, all put into a collage. And when you have all that together, it's like, wow, I mean, it's just really impactful. So as far as like mimetic warfare and all that goes, put your stuff out there. If you do still want to go to new events, well, first of all, be really thoughtful about it, because the risk of serious violence and the kind of violence that you can't defend yourself against, that you really have no chance of defending yourself against, is not slim. Certainly not as slim as I would like. I would definitely recommend, doing as much research as you can beforehand on whatever the event is. If it's in a city where the police are going to be very sympathetic to the left, I would probably say just don't go. I mean, I feel like that's part of, we saw that with Berkeley, we saw that with Charlottesville, because the police have, again, it's kind of one of those trump cards, right? Like you can try and do everything smart yourself and try to like just stay away from the Antifa or do whatever, but the police can do things like they can disarm you and then throw you out into a mob.
Right. At the end of the day, they work for the establishment, right? Right.
Which is kind of what happened to us with the Milo event, because in order to attend the Milo event, we weren't allowed to carry a whole bunch of stuff. That would normally be legal to carry. Like if you were just out on the street,
Same with the Charlottesville guys.
You got pepper spray, exactly same thing. But they're not protecting you in and out of the event, right? So you're going to go into the event, you're going to be totally disarmed, and then they're going to throw you back out into the mob. That's essentially, only in my case, I didn't even get the going in part. It was just thrown straight into the mob. I don't think realistically there's a good way to fight back against that. I mean, I hope it's not counteracting the white pill too much. I don't think it's worth it to fight it on the very liberal turf where the establishment sort of controls that, because they have too much power, and I think it's not worth it. But in other areas, I think it really is. We saw great footage with a Huntington Beach rally last year, where some Antifa showed up, and I'm
they got
from
BTFO,
around
didn't
that
they?
area. Yeah, and that stuff is great. That stuff is great because they're not going to put the good stuff on the media, mainstream media anyway, right? So there's no point in courting that. But if we can get another GIF of like the guy getting a wedgie, or the guy with the dog like biting his leg, like all that stuff.
Demoralizes them, yeah.
Exactly. That stuff is valuable, And then of course there's the obvious sort of tactical stuff, I guess, which is like wear a body cam, like you said, travel in groups.
Mm-hmm.
We were in a pretty big group, but
you kind of were overwhelmed though.
Yeah. There's like 2,000 people, right? So like when I say a group, I don't mean like you and 3 friends. Like you need a real group. Like you need a plan for going in and out of all of these events, and getting people in and out safely. And especially if you're bringing, like please don't bring children, but if you're bringing like women and like older people into the event, which I think you should, because we don't, we want to show that this is like broad, right? That like there's a wide array of people, on the right, and a wide array of people that like Antifa is perfectly willing to attack. Definitely have a plan for getting those people in and out as safely as possible.
I completely agree. There are places within the U.S. where these rallies or protests can be held, where the police won't immediately be our enemy. I've heard that the police in Washington, D.C. have been pretty nice to people on the right doing various events and allow them to go off without too much of a hiccup, or to the point where the Antifa are completely demoralized. So there are alternatives to going to completely liberal-infested areas. But yeah, thank you so much for coming onto my podcast and sharing your story. Let my listeners know where they can find you.
The best place to look for me is on Twitter. I am at @smisanthrope on there, and then also on YouTube. My channel is called Strategic Misanthropy.
I'll have all that linked down below. Thank you so much for joining me. There's a video version of this podcast up at 27crowsradio.com and an audio version on Spreaker.com. Take care, everyone. Bye.